Hello and welcome to the Sprint39 review. The sprint went one day over because we're about to cut the Darga branch. So up late until last night and even into the early hours this morning. So next slide, please. All right, as usual, I'll do the sprint statistics. Dan will give a overview of the user interface. Gregg Blomquist will talk about the providers. Tanzillo about the platform stuff. Alberto about the REST API. Rich will give an update on the SmartState. McCullough will give an update on Automate and services. Barak will give an update on Dockerizing ManageIQ. And Dennis will update us on work in the performance area. Next slide, please. All right, we made a new record. I don't know if adding the 1 day did it, but it's a crazy number, as you guys will see in a couple of slides, how it compares to previous sprints. We've never broken 400. We usually are in the 200s, so just to give you an idea of where it was. I don't know why there were so many, but that's where it ended up. As you can see, there's a pretty even split there between bugs and enhancements, and then about 150 each, and then everything else sprinkled around that. Next slide, please. Okay, if you break it down the pull requests by category, about 144 there. It looks like we're in the UI. 144 were in the where's that, Automate? Or is that provider? It's hard to tell on the color screen. Yeah, 144 in the UI, 144 in the providers, 66 in core, just really kind of everywhere, all around, just solid performance. And if we look at the drill down in the providers there, also, you know, a lot of the pie chart there, a quarter of it seems to be on the container side, but every single other provider is like well represented with multiple PRs as well. So really an awesome all-around effort. Next slide, please. Yeah, so as you see there, we're usually like way down in the 200s. So this compares sprints based, you know, in a different format. And I'm hoping that over time we can learn something from this. Right now it's just kind of interesting information. But last time we had anywhere near this number was in Sprint 31, 8 sprints ago. And I think that was when we were ending the previous Capablanca release. So I don't know if that's kind of fun.
That is.
Yeah. And as you see, Sprint 32 was mostly bug fixes, and as well as Sprint 33, and then it went back to kind of being split 50-50. I'm expecting that Sprint 40 and 41 will have a similar kind of dynamic where it's going to be mostly bug fixes and fewer enhancements as we kind of work on stabilizing Darga. And next slide, please. All right, so you know, not only was there a lot of work done, a ridiculous amount of work done in the ManageIQ repository, a lot of the other repositories were also updated. Ansible, Azure, a lot of the documentation, the appliance build stuff, the bot, work on the overgem, like really work everywhere was kind of done in the sprint. Next slide, please. All right, and as I keep mentioning, Darga is coming. Today we're going to be making the Darga branch. It's named after Klaus Darga, a chess grandmaster. That's one of our themes for release names. So we'll be making the branch today. The first Darga build will be coming out in the next few days. And then the next 2 sprints will be focused on stabilizing Darga. And we're planning to release Darga in June. The next release is going to be starting with the letter E, and think of, you know, candidate names now, and we will have voting during ManageIQ Summit, and kind of hope to close the voting out that week and announce it either at the summit or a couple of days after. Next slide, please. All right, so I'll turn it over to Dan to tell us all the exciting stuff in the UI area.
Great, thanks. All right, so following the theme, obviously the PR stats there shows that a lot of enhancements, a lot of bug fixes, and I expect in the UI team it's going to follow the same way in the next couple sprints, where the bug PRs will go up, enhancements will go down. Although we have a few more things to get in as far as enhancements, but they're minor. There's tons of new functionality. These are really just the highlights. We had our hands kind of in a lot of places this sprint. One of the biggest, most visible changes is the new navigation menus. You'll see them in a demo from Eric Winchell. And I just want to point out, I mean, this is not just a front end change. I mean, this has been actually years in the making. I mean, trying to get rid of static controls and make things resizable and responsive, and also on the back end, cleaning up a lot of the structures that represent all this, so that we could easily change the front end without affecting, and breaking the product in the back end. And just kudos to the whole team for getting this whole thing done. Really nice demo on that. We've added some features into the VM reconfigure area where we can add and remove disks now. There's a demo of that, and some changes in the orchestration templates area, being able to create and copy orderable templates. Just squeak this one in, the data store clusters for VMware vSphere. So data stores used to just be a flat screen. Now it's actually an Explorer. Once we have hierarchical information to show inside the UI, we tend to move them to Explorer views with trees on the left. And so have some screenshots for that. Eric's going to cover some of the changes we've made on the styling side. I finally got rid of the Slick Grid library and replaced that with a pattern fly, as we're trying to do with most everything we're inside the UI. Also more styling updates to the dashboard and other areas. We used to only allow compliance checking on VMs and instances, and now you can do the same thing on templates and images. There's a new UI for the replication configuration. I think the core team is going to cover that. And there's some updates to the new multiple provider endpoints. I think someone's going to cover that as well. Maybe Gregg B. I'm not sure. Next slide. All right, so this is the new Data Store Explorer. So if you are familiar with the old one, it was really just a list of data stores. Now you still have that list here. So you still have the existing functionalities put into the first accordion. And the next slide, please. That will show where we can actually see the new clusters. And you can then drill down into them by the cluster and see the data stores within each cluster, and go at the data that way as well. All right, next slide. Okay, I'm going to let Eric just talk about these next few slides.
So in this sprint, we completed replacing Slick Grid with Tree Grid. This allows us to embed a tree within a pattern fly table. Tree Grid is currently used on the compare and drift screens, as well as various import screens. Next slide, please. We also began the process of replacing PNG images with SVGs throughout the UI. Beginning with the vendor and OS icons that are displayed in the list views and the quad icons. Eventually, we'd like to replace all the PNGs with a combination of vector-based SVGs and font icons. Next slide, please. We've made a number of other pattern fly styling updates, including a new header background image that has been added by default, and it is now synced with the self-service UI header. It can be easily customized using the SAS file that's linked at the bottom of the screen. It's a SAS variable. Dashboard widgets and backgrounds have been restyled with pattern fly cards. This visually syncs up the main dashboard with the container dashboard. Okay, I'm going to turn it back over to Dan, who's going to go through a series of demos.
All right, so we've got two recordings. One is to show the new vertical navigation menus, and then Harpreet put the other two demos together into one recording. So I will try to share my screen and get this going here. Let's see. It's trying to get there. Okay, are we seeing my screen? That's the question. Can you guys see my screen or no?
I don't see it yet.
I don't have the button that says share my desktop. So try again here.
You click on.
It should be on the.
Yeah, I have share my screen. Oh, there it is. Now it's coming back. Okay, share entire desktop. There we go. For some reason, it wasn't doing that. Okay. So let's get this first one. All right, are we seeing that?
Now, Dan.
Yes.
All right, here we go.
In this sprint, we introduced the new Patternfly vertical navigation with tertiary menu. The new vertical navigation has several advantages. The number of menu items is not constrained by the viewport width. For years, we have struggled with a minimum browser width of around 1280 pixels because of the growing number of secondary menu items. That is no longer an issue. And with 3 levels of navigation, we've begun to more logically organize our screens under 4 new primary menu items. They are Compute, Configuration, Networks, and Storage. The menu can be toggled between icon with text and icon only mode using the menu drawer, or what we call the hamburger, in the top left of the header. As before, by clicking on either a primary or secondary item rather than hovering, the user is taken to the last screen visited in a given area. Another great feature is the ability to collapse either the secondary or tertiary menu to the primary position using the left arrow at the top of each menu. This is very convenient when working in an isolated part of the UI. The menu can be expanded again by clicking on the arrow again, which is now facing right. With the new navigation in place, we'll be more focused on designing screens to respond appropriately for desktop, tablet, and mobile. Thank you.
All right, great. That's cool. Okay, so I've got the next one queued up here. Let's see if I can get this going. There we go. This Harpreet's going to walk us through a couple other new features.
Hi, in this quick demo, I'm going to show a couple of new features that were added during this sprint. First, I'm going to show the support to add or remove disks from a VM reconfigure request. Just wanted to point out something that currently this feature is only supported for VMware VMs and also when a single VM is selected to be reconfigured. So here we go. I'm going to select a single VM from the list of VMs and press reconfigure selected items. As you can see, we added this new table disks here, and that's displaying the existing disks on this VM. And I'm going to go ahead, add a new one. And disk size is a required field to add a disk. And there are a couple of other fields that you can select. I'll hit add here. And I'm going to add one more. So as you can see, the new ones that I just added are being displayed in the blue background. Just some visual difference. So you can tell these ones are the newly added ones. And if you want, you can delete an existing one. And as soon as I hit delete button, it marks the one that I just deleted in the red background, just another visual difference. So if you want, you can go ahead and cancel the delete, or you can keep it the way it is if you like it. And if you want, you can cancel the one that you just added. That's going to go away from the table. And I'm going to add one more. And I'm going to hit submit. This is going to bring me to the list of requests screen. And the one that on the top is the one that I just added. I'm going to go to the summary screen of that request. And as you can see, it shows that I added 2 disks and I removed 1 disk. And if you would like, you can go to edit this request. And you can make changes here if you like. I'm going to hit cancel out of this. And then I'm going to show you the next feature that was added. That was in the orchestration templates area. So in the previous sprints or previous build, we used to show all kinds of orchestration templates in the Catalogs Explorer. But during this sprint, we made a change to only show the orderable templates in Catalogs Explorer. So as you can see in the heat templates, currently I only have one orderable template. So I'm going to go to Cloud Stacks and go to the stack that has a non-orderable template, and going to, this is the new screen that was added, and now you can make this non-orderable template into an orderable one, or you can copy this one into a new orderable template. So I'm going to go hit make orchestration template orderable button, and this changes the non-orderable template into an orderable one. And then I'm going to go to view this orchestration template in catalogs. And as you can see, now I have 2 of these. And that concludes my demo. Thank you.
All right, great. I can turn this over, I think, to Marianne.
All right. Can everyone hear me okay?
You're good.
Awesome. So this sprint, as Oleg and Dan have already pointed out, this was a crazy sprint with tons of new features, tons of new things in the provider space too. So as a quick preview for Sprint39, I'm going to talk about a new feature for the VMware provider. Dan and Brona are going to talk about some Azure updates. And then I'm going to talk about some OpenSCAP integration changes. And I'll show off a video that Ladislav put together showcasing the network provider and topology view. Then I'm going to hand it over to Heiko to talk about some Hawkular middleware updates, and Federico to talk about some container changes. And then Gregg M is going to talk about Ansible. Then finally, I'm going to cover some updates from the Rev provider. So let's dive in. Next slide. So one of the things, Dan actually showed this on when he talked about the cluster data stores where it has the tree view. On the provisioning side, Adam Greer and James Wong, actually a recent addition to our team, updated the provisioning process to show whether a data store is clustered or not. So previously, you'd only see a list of data stores without knowing if it was part of a cluster, and we've added that so it's a little bit clearer during provisioning. Next slide. All right, over to Dan to talk about what he's done with the Add New Azure Provider page.
So let's be pretty brief. Previously in Azure, when you added a new cloud provider, you did not have a choice of adding a subscription ID. Instead, what would happen would be the code would look for the first valid subscription, and it would use that for inventory. The update there, if you look just below tenant ID, you see subscription ID field. So now a user can enter a subscription ID, and it will collect inventory for that subscription. They still have the option of leaving that blank, in which case it will fall back to the first active subscription that it can find and collect inventory for that. But yep, they can add a subscription now.
Cool.
That's it for me.
And I think the other piece of this is that now when you add Azure providers, you can actually add multiple Azure providers, one for each of your subscriptions. So we'll collect inventory across that single subscription. All right, so over to next slide to talk for Brona to talk about Azure events.
Can you see my screen?
Yep.
All right, so we're looking at the instance view of an Azure provider, and all instances are powered off except one, which is called Azure Demo. So to demonstrate event support, I'm going to power off this instance. And this is going to trigger an event to be fired from Azure, and through polling, ManageIQ will receive the event. Now, without event support, I would have to manually refresh the Azure provider to update the power status property. But with event support in place, an EMS refresh is automatically kicked off during event processing, so all I have to do is refresh the page. And now you'll see that the power status quadrant has been updated to indicate that the instance is off. Now, the event switchboard in Automate is responsible for acting upon events. So we'll take a look at that. So by default, 5 Azure events are configured to trigger an EMS refresh, but this can be customized. And lastly, I've generated a report widget. We'll take a look at that. So this report reads events from the database and displays some of the more frequently fired event types, such as power operations, instance creation, deletion, modification, deallocation of storage, for example. However, we do accept almost all events that are fired from Azure. And that's it. Next slide.
Awesome. Thanks, Brona.
Great. You're welcome.
So on the OpenStack front, one of the big things that was added this sprint is the ability to pick up events from Stylometer. This is important for a couple of reasons. First, it allows ManageIQ to grab events across the standard REST API for OpenStack. This helps reduce the complexity of maintaining different clients to talk to OpenStack, whereas before we'd have to talk over the REST API and an AMQP bus. It also gives the user the choice to not expose their OpenStack AMQP endpoint to ManageIQ. And this is important because we're actually seeing more and more cases where OpenStack administrators configure their OpenStack services on 2 separate networks. One external that allows access to the REST API, and one internal network accessible only by the OpenStack nodes for internal communication, including AMQP. So I think this is one of those good changes that kind of, we're trying to listen to the feedback we're getting from the community and trying to make it easier for users there. Next slide. All right, I'm going to play a few videos that Ladislav put together a really long video detailing a lot of different changes in the networking provider side. It's a really great video with tons of really good detail. I'm going to actually ask Marianne to include the link when she posts this video, when she posts the sprint review. I'm going to ask her to include the link to Ladislav's full video so you can see the rest of the detail. I've split it up into a couple smaller pieces, and I'm going to show what I've got right now. All right, the first video is here.
This is Ladislav. I'm a Red Hat engineer, And today I will show you the new features in ManageIQ around networking and the topology view. So we have a new top-level tab network here with all the networking sections, all the inventory we can go from all the providers. Let's start with the topology view to have the high-level view of all the providers. You can see quite a lot of data, and my monitor isn't that big. So let's just filter it out and check the basic relations. We are interested in VMs and connection to subnets and taggings. So we can see we have two tags that are connecting our providers, and they are connecting the subnets. So let's pick them up. There is also connection to VM. Okay, so let's look at the tags. This is environment prod, so this is our production environment. So you can see all the subnets on the production environment here. And this is environment dev, so you can see basically the whole development environment here. And it's tagged across providers, so you can see VMs in that environment from Azure, OpenSCAP, and Ansible. Okay, so let's look at other relations in the topology view, but let's drill down into just one provider, for example, OpenSCAP for now. Here you have a link to the topology view. Right, so it's much smaller. So let's go one by one to show all the relations. So we have seen this. With this, we can nicely see how all the VMs are connecting to subnets. So we are using mainly just one subnet. That is not very good. We can see the security groups that are being used. So they are interconnected a lot, which is not very good. So subnet is pretty clean with all the VMs under one security group. We can see cloud networks. So let's see this one. This cloud network called network private. It has two subnets. Here we have network called network private 3, and it is one subnet and one VM in there. Okay, so on top of that, we can show network routers. So you can see this. Those two subnets are connected to a router called router, and that router has public network as its gateway. It has a public subnet, so this subnet is used for generating floating IPs, and it has another router connected to that, which connects another two subnets, and one of them is our other subnet with VM. Right? So public network, two routers connected to that, and subnets connected to those routers. And on top of that, we can show also floating IPs. So those floating IPs are connected to the public network and then to individual VMs. Right? So this VM has this floating IP and it's connected to this network. Or we can just hide the networks and just see which VMs has the floating IP and which not. It's cleaner to get rid of everything else. Just see it like that. Get subnets, VMs, and floating IPs connected to them. And with this, we can see the floating IPs and the connections to the public network. Right, the last connection is cloud tenants. So we can browse what tenants are used for the VMs. You can see all the VMs we have are under one tenant right now. So in the instance, we can see which network it belongs to, which subnets it is connected to, the network routers it is connected to, security groups that are used, faulting IPs that are associated, and network ports that are on the VM. So let's go through the network ports. We can see it has one network port, MAC address. The network port has one fixed IP and one called subnet. With IPv6, we can have actually multiple subnets associated to one network port, and it has one floating IP. Detail of the floating IP, we can see the floating IP address, the fixed IP address it is associated to. Right, so the public network, these are the instances that are actually connected through routers to the public network. These are the network routers connected to this public network. And this is the subnet of the public network, so this is just used for generating of the floating IPs.
All right, so that's really, honestly, just a taste of what Ladislav has put together. Marianne, if you can go ahead and grab the slides back.
Okay.
Yeah. So over to Heiko to talk about middleware. Go on, Heiko.
Yes. Hi. So Hokula, for the middleware provider, has added two larger features in this sprint. The first one is the event catcher. We have done that currently only for deployments. So when you deploy a new application into your application server, you get an event fired, be it for success or for failure. We have added for the event groups a new group called application for this case. And as you can see here, we have one event, which is a deployment failure, which is shown at summary level because it's more severe. And if you would go to detail level, you could also see deployment success of applications. We will, of course, add other types for what I'm showing on the next slide, and more, of course, and also run more into the automation then and make use of it. So next slide, please. We do now have started power operations to reload and stop managed middleware servers. So this is on the left part. You see the grid view with two servers selected and the reload and stop operations. And as you can also see on the left part, one of these servers that is selected is a Hokula provider, so the middleware provider itself. We pull that in because you can, of course, monitor the middleware server or provider itself. So it is just another server. And we have added functionality here that if you select the Hokula provider, that it is not reloaded, which is shown on the right part of it. So you will get a message that says not reloading the Hokula server or not stopping the reload Hokula server, so that you basically don't cut the branch you're sitting on. That's it from me. Back to Gregg then. Thanks.
All right, next slide. So over to Federico to talk about containers.
Yeah, thanks, Gregg. So great effort from the containers team. For this sprint, we had roughly 36 pull requests, well balanced between bugs, enhancement, and features. I'd start going over the features that we added in this sprint review, in this sprint, and I'd have to say that many of these ones are a long time effort. They started 1 month ago or a couple of months ago, and they have been concretized right now in this very last sprint before branching out. So let's start with chargeback. We added the support for chargeback in containers. As you see, we have a couple of screenshots here. We have the rate assignments to the container providers. And in the other screenshot, you can see that we are exposing really specific metrics for containers to do chargeback reports on. So next slide. In the next slide, you'll see that the chargeback metrics that we consider are per project, and we do CPU course usage, memory, and network were available. I'll talk about the network matrix a little bit later on. I just want to mention that we use CPU cores instead of megahertz. That is usually what you do with VMs, because in OpenShift and Kubernetes, that's the unit for quota. So that's what the user expects to be built against, and and we built all the metrics around that for chargeback as well. So next slide. So we also integrated with OpenSCAP. So back in September, we added the SmartState analysis support for continuous images. We are able to pick inside of the images in containers and list the RPMs. We built on top of that the support for OpenSCAP. These two features are actually not very much interdependent. The SmartState analysis and OpenSCAP can either succeed or fail independently. They're not actually built on top of each other, but they use the same job scheduling that we had for the SmartState analysis. We still basically instantiate new scanning pod inside of the cluster, and on top of exposing the web through WebDAV the image, we are also running OpenSCAP and exposing the results to ManageIQ that collects that information and saves those into the database. On top of that, you can do policies out of these results of OpenSCAP and visualize the results also in HTML. If you're more familiar with that kind of output from the OpenSCAP tool. We come with a couple of out-of-the-box policies that are ready there to be used and can be attached to the containers providers, which basically are scheduling at regular intervals the scan of these images, because new CVE can be available, and therefore we need to rescan the images to detect those. We also have an optimization to actually run the scan on an image as soon as it is discovered. Not only that, not only we do the scan, but we are also pushing back the results into OpenShift, annotating the images so that they can leverage that for some features on their side, like preventing some images from running. Next slide. So we have a couple of screenshots here just to give you a taste of what the features look like. On the right, the addition is the 3 items of the OpenSCAP result link that tells you how many rules were evaluated against that image. The availability of the HTML report that you can open and look at, and the last scan when it took place. When you go into the OpenSCAP results, then you have the list of the rules that were evaluated against that image that you see in the other screenshot more on the left and at the bottom. Basically, you'll see that for each rule, you have whether it failed, passed, or not applicable, and the severity, low, medium, high. Against every rule, you can create a specific policy if you want to. Next slide. So as I said, we introduced some out-of-the-box policies for the images scan, and you can also augment those with some other policies that you want to add if you wish. And in the same way, we are planning to extend the support for also nodes and pods, and we already laid the ground for that into this sprint, and we'll work against that going forward. So as you see here in the policies, we added the container images, compliance and control policies. We are planning to also add pods and nodes. And also on the left, you see the additional events. We will gonna continue and augment those thanks to the work that we introduced into this sprint. Next slide. So we already had cross-linking, which means that we are able to identify what are the VMs on top of which the OpenShift and Kubernetes nodes are running. That was already implemented for Rev, VMware, and OpenStack. We extended the support leveraging the provider ID that is reported by Kubernetes and OpenShift. And as you see here in the screenshot, we are now reporting also the underlying instance in case it's GCE or Amazon. In the next slide, you can see that basically we are right now in this transition between OpenShift Origin 1.1 and 1.3. We are leveraging the cloud provider to be configured in Kubernetes and OpenShift, but looking toward the future, we are planning to automate the detection of the cloud provider and therefore support also Azure, which is currently not supported in OpenShift and Kubernetes. Next slide. We did a couple of additions in the dashboard. We added the new image usage trend, which basically tells you how many new images were discovered in the last hour, and the pods creation and deletion trends, which is instead telling you how many pods were created and deleted in the last hour. They are all nicely reported in the dashboard as a graph and stored as metrics in the database. Next slide. So as I mentioned earlier, we introduced the network metrics for pods. This is highly dependent on the hipster version that you're running inside of your OpenShift deployment. It is currently supported only in OpenShift Origin 1.2, and so therefore 1.1 or OpenShift Enterprise are not supported yet. But if you have the correct version of hipster, we are able to collect also the metrics for pods and the networking metrics for pods. Next slide. So in the on the minor enhancement that we had, we upgraded to new gems, Kube Client, OpenShift Client, and Image Inspector, which allowed us to actually implement all the features that I mentioned earlier. And we are now also displaying labels for projects and routes, which was a minor missing item that we wanted to close the gap into this sprint. Next slide. So I really want to mention also the great effort that we took in the last couple of days to merge patches that will allow us to continue working on several items like the OpenShift deployment automation and especially also the auto tagging based on Kubernetes labels. So we see that items and entities are coming in and out so fast from the OpenShift deployment that are really hard to tag manually. So we want to automatically tag them based on labels that are attached to these entities. And this will be also the foundation to support regions and zones in the future. And we are really looking forward to use the multi-endpoints for ocular metrics that will simplify very much the OpenShift deployment with metrics with no additional router on the master node. And with that, I think I can turn it back to Gregg.
Awesome. So if anybody was wondering, that's what it looks like when a team, when a single provider adds nearly 40 pull requests. That was a lot of work that came in from the providers team this time. So good work, guys. Next slide. So over to Gregg M to talk about Ansible.
Sure. So in this sprint, we got in 2 new relationships. One is linking the job templates back to the inventory, which is useful in cases where we need to actually refresh the inventory and pull in new hosts once a job template is launched from Ansible. And we also are able to collect data from Ansible Tower that tells us the relationship back to virtual machines for most of the providers that we support. So if the provider is defined within cloud forms, within ManageIQ and also within Ansible Tower, we can link those and be able to jump back and forth in the UI. That's still, the UI work is still coming, but we now have that relationship to support that. And as well, we've added a new namespace, the configuration management Ansible Tower namespace has all the modeling that is used by the integrations. So not to be outdone, we've created 3 demos ourselves for the sprint to run through and show how the integration works in the different areas. So if Bill share his screen first.
Okay. Oh, waiting.
Yep.
Okay. So in this demo, I'm going to show the new service type Ansible Tower. How do we create a catalog item and how to order the service? So that catalog item is under computer services and catalogs. Then go to catalog items and add a new catalog item. Now we have a new type, Ansible Tower, available. I give a name and description. Assign to the existing catalog. And pick a dialog. And the provider is the Ansible Tower. And I can select a job template. And the provisioning entry point is already there. I just want to show you it is pointing to the new namespace called configuration management. And underneath we can find Ansible Tower and the service. And it's pointing to the default state machine. And now we are ready to add that catalog item. Once it's added, we can go to the Surface catalogs and actually order the catalog item. Then we go to that the dialog. The Surface dialog is generated by a tool we create. This tool we pass the survey and extra variable data, and based on them build up the dialog fields. And for survey, there are 7 types of parameter types Ansible Tower support. And for extra variables, they are just simply key and the values, and we decide to by default put them as read only, but you can go ahead and enable it for editable. On top, we have added an option called limit. We just impose some extra constraints to the hosts that playbook can apply to. So we can go ahead. So in this demo, I'll just change one of the parameters from the default value, and then can actually order the service. So while we are waiting for it to complete, we can go to the Ansible Tower console window and to see the actual provisioning on that side. So in this job, we see it's pending right now, and once it's finished, we'll go to the details, and we can examine the new parameter. I just type in, it's actually passed in here. So once this job is complete, we can go back to ManageIQ side and verify it is also complete the request. And the resulting job actually is, we can see in the orchestration stacks table, because it's modeled after orchestration stack. Here you can see multiple instances. They all called they all have the same name. This is because the job does not have its own name, and so we have to use the job template's name as its own name. So here I ordered a few. I ordered the job template a few times, so they end up the same name. And yeah, of course we have some UI work need to enhance. So right now we cannot click into that job instance. And that concludes my demo.
Cool. Thanks, Bill.
To stop right.
Madhu is next.
Yep.
Yeah, he's trying.
Okay.
Able to see my screen?
Just look over there, Madhu.
So the answer is no.
There you
There
go.
we go.
Perfect. Okay, so one of the use cases that I'm going to talk about is if you have an existing VM in your environment and you actually want to run an Ansible job on that particular VM. So we have created a button which actually would allow you to pick a job template and execute it on the VM. So in here, you're actually seeing a view of the different job templates that are actually available on the Ansible tower. And there's one called package info, which actually lists the information about a package. It actually goes after the automatic bug reporting tool, and there are a bunch of parameters in there, like the sleep time and which user to use. And once this job template is defined, it can actually be pulled into ManageIQ during an EMS refresh. So if we go back into our ManageIQ stuff, you'll actually see that under infrastructure, we actually have the different virtual machines. And I'm trying to get a VM that is actually known to Ansible. So if we click on a VM and start an Ansible job, there is a button for Ansible Tower job. You select that and you click on the Ansible Tower, the name of the tower that you have. Then you can do a refresh to pick up the job templates that are available. And I'm going to pick up the package info and provide parameters in here, like the package that we want to test, which is, in this case, I'm trying to override the one that's already defined in the job template. And I'm also introducing a sleep so that we can see how long it takes for the job to run, and the retry logic for ManageIQ gets kicked in. If we go back into the Ansible tower now, and if we click on the jobs, you would actually see that that job actually got kicked in here, and it's running right now. And the way we have set up the inventory group, we actually have to do a refresh because the same use case is actually extended when we try to do run job templates during provisioning. So here we ran the first one, and then if we look at the details of the job, you'd actually see that we passed in OpenSSL and the sleep amount of how long to wait. And if we keep refreshing, I think you'll see that the job ends. And you can also look at the job details, like there is a sleep amount, how long we waited. And then you can also get details of the package. You can you can look at the standard output here. And then right now we don't have a way of parsing it, but I think in the future we might be adding ways to actually pull this data down from the tower and allow an automate method to use. And I think that's about it.
Right. So to be clear, the button is actually just a custom button assigned to VM, so it's not an Ansible Tower button added into the product, right? So in there you can define, a dialog that takes the parameters that you want to provide. You can even provide actually the job template name in there as well, so it doesn't have to be offered as
a question,
as a field, So, if people are looking for the Ansible Tower button in the UI, it's not there. It's a custom button that was generated for this.
Maybe you guys can write some sort of talk article to kind of review what you actually did to make that custom button happen, so that other people can make that happen out in the field.
So the second use case is actually running Ansible job templates after we have provisioned a new VM. So at this point, Ansible doesn't know that the VM exists in their environment. So we had to provision the VM, and we had to tell Ansible that go update your inventory, and then we wait for that machine to show up, and then we fire off jobs on the Ansible tower. Now in this example, I'm going to show you how we fire off multiple job templates, not just one. You can actually fire as many as you want on after the provisioning is done. So I'll talk about the model. Like Gregg was saying, we have a new namespace called configuration management. Under that, we have Ansible Tower. Then we have the bunch of operations in there, and I think Bill just showed you what's there on the service side. I'm going to talk about the job template. This job template actually represents the Ansible Tower job template, but we don't see all the instances in here because we take advantage of the dot missing, which allows you to plug in the name of the instance at runtime. And there are a whole bunch of parameters that you can add in here. And at the tail end of it, you'd see us executing the state machine, which is defined in the state machines folder. And under the parameters actually allow you to change the parameters in the job template at runtime. This can be substituted from different objects in Automate. In the state machines, we actually have two classes, one for doing a single job and another one for doing multiple jobs. There are two methods that are in there, one for actually launching the Ansible job, and the second one is actually waiting for its completion. These two methods allow you to do retries, so if you actually have a long-running task, you can actually wait for that task to end. Now, I have modified the state machine for VM provisioning. There is a slot in there for running Ansible jobs, which is the one that you see up in the middle. It actually runs a bunch of templates in there. And in my case, I'm actually going to be running two of the job templates. And yeah, so I think the job templates, the run templates, actually, if you look at the details of that, the first thing that we do is we wait for the VM to be powered on or its IP address to be available, and then we fire off the two job templates one after the other. Now, these things are running as state machines so that we don't want to be executing the first one again if there was an issue, so each one runs independently as a state machine. So in this scenario, we actually have, like for running this, a state machine within a state machine. And this is the simple logic to actually check for the IP being available for the VM. Once the IP is available, we can actually fire off the job templates on the remote system. So I'm actually going to now start a provisioning on the vCenter that we have. So this is a template. I pick a template and go through the provisioning. Fill in all the parameters and like the standard CAN stuff, there's nothing new in here. So provide a name for the new VM. So this VM at this point is unknown to Ansible Tower. So at the end of the provisioning, we'll actually refresh its inventory so that Ansible knows about it, and then we can fire up jobs on it. Now I'm going to submit the job. I think I still need to pick up the host and the storage. So now, once we have submitted this, it's going to get approved, and I'm just going to jump to the point where the provisioning is almost done. So we finished the VM customization, and pretty soon we'll be seeing us waiting for the VM to be available, and then switching into launching the Ansible jobs one after the other. Okay, so I think at the end what happens is you see that we fired off these two job templates. The MK sample was the first one, and the second one is the package info. If you were to look in the information here, you'd see that it's a Sprint Demo 420. That's a newly minted VM. And then we did not update any of the parameters, so it actually uses the default variables that are actually defined in the playbook. And that's it. I think that's it. Then.
Cool. Thanks, Madhu.
Thank you.
Very cool.
Marianne, I think you can bring the slides back. And next slide.
Awesome. So thanks to GM and the and all the awesome stuff with Ansible. So this sprint, I actually dusted off a keyboard and wrote a little bit of code. And I know most of you just know me as a manager, but I can actually do that every once in a while. I refactored the inventory refresh process to try to allow other providers to take advantage of the process that VMware provider uses for targeted refresh. As a quick aside, those who don't know what I'm talking about, targeted refresh is a process that providers can use to collect inventory for specific inventory targets based on information we receive from events emitted by that provider. And targeted refresh can have a pretty significant impact on the performance when it comes to inventory refresh process. And before my changes were even merged, Piotr Klaczewski from the Rev integration team grabbed my changes and implemented targeted refresh for Rev. So obviously this makes me really happy that my refactoring worked. I mean, I am just a manager, I don't, but it also puts the Rev provider into a pretty exclusive club of providers that support targeted refresh, a club that up until the end of the sprint only included VMware. So good job, Piotr. And next slide. Oh yeah, one more thing. Next slide. I'm going to hand it over to Julian to show off some work he did on multiple endpoints.
Thanks, Greg. Let me just share my screen. Can you all see that?
Just coming up now,
Yes.
Julian.
Yes.
Cool. Right. So, start this. So first of all, we're just going to create a new cloud provider. I'm sure you've all seen this screen before. So we're just going to choose OpenSCAP. And the first thing you notice is that all of the endpoint information is now down at the bottom of the screen. So if we choose the security, the name, the username and password, this is something that we've all done lots and lots of times. And this is as much as we ever could do up until now. And as you'll see, if we click on the MQP tab, we can now create a separate endpoint for the MQP server with, it could be a different host name, could be a subnet, can even have different security protocols and different username and password. And the other thing you'll notice is it comes pre-populated with its default API port. And then we can just click add. And there we go. And then we can go, if we go back into the provider, into the edit page, we can see that all of that information was stored and retrieved. So you can go back and edit either the default endpoint or the MQP endpoint at any time. Cool. So that was cloud. So let's see what we can do with infrastructure. So we're going to create a new infrastructure provider. So if you just give it a name. So we're going to create a Red Hat Enterprise Virtualization Manager. It's a mouthful. So again, this is going to be familiar, but it's all the endpoint information is down at the bottom of the screen. So we create a host name, give it an API port, and credentials. And again, up until now, this is as much as we could do. But now, when we click on the CNU database tab, we can give it a separate host name. It can, again, could be on a different network, could be a subnet, comes pre-populated with the port, and again, it can have separate credentials. So if we just add that, and then if we go back into it, we can have a look and see that all that information is still there. Cool. That's the end of my demo. So back over to you, Greg.
That's really cool. Thanks, Julian. All right, I think next slide and over to, I think it's GT to talk about core things.
Yep. Thanks, Greg.
Platform things.
Platform. Yep. So on the platform side, we had
enhancements in replication. So we have the new replication, and thanks to Nick and Harpreet, we have the configuration screen for that. So that one's pretty much ready to go. So I'll show some screenshots of that. For chargeback, the team in Spain got a pretty big enhancement in there for tiered rating. So I'll show some details about that one, and we got some enhancements on the appliance console, and then later I'll turn it over to Alberto for the REST API. Next slide. So the replication configuration for the new replication is a little bit different. It's much simpler than it was before because the way the replication works, the global database actually subscribes to changes from the remotes. So really the main configuration is done on the global side. On the regional database side, you just need to enable replication. So I'll show you screenshots of that. Next slide. So on the remote region, basically you just go in, there's a replication tab on the region settings, and you just go in and set the type of replication. So on the regional side, it's just remote. Next slide. Okay. And then on the global side, I know we skipped the slide, but it's probably not that important. I think it just showed saving the remote type there. On the global side, there you go in and set the type to global, and then for each of your regions, you would add the connection information. So and here, so I'm adding one there, and then in the next slide, I think you'll see that there's a validate button for each one of those when you add them. So if you can go to the next one. Right, so there's a validate or discard there. And then you can go to the next slide. And then you could save that, and then it gives you a slot to add another one. So you add as many of these as you have regions. And once you add these, it actually behind the scenes will do the synchronization that you're familiar with the old replication, and then start replication.
Does it like 100 times faster?
Yeah. Next slide. Okay, so on the chargeback side, so this is a real team effort between the team in Spain and people on the ManageIQ side. Really want to thank Harpreet and Joe Raffanello and Libor as well for their help getting this PR merged. It was pretty big PR. There's a lot of functionality here. There's still some bugs we're working out. I'm trying to do a demo for you with this for the next sprint. But so what we have here is the support for tiered rates. So currently with chargeback, you were only able to set a single rate for each of the types of metrics that we do charging on. So if you look at the example here, you could see for allocated CPU count, there's 4 tiers. So you have basically the range from 0 to 4, from 4 to 8, from 8 to 16, and then 16 on up. And you can see there's a different variable rate for those. So when it runs a report, it's going to use the proper rate depending on the value of the metric. Next slide, please. And just a little quality of life improvement for the appliance console. If you're tired of typing appliance_console over and over again, you can now type AP. Thanks, Joe V for sneaking that one in. Next slide. Okay, I'll turn it over to Alberto for this improvement for the appliance console.
Thanks, Greg. So one enhancement that went into the appliance console is exposing the external authentication options. You'll see here on the left side, the 10. So once you run the 3 options that are available on the appliance on the web UI for external authentication, things like using SSO, SAML, or local login. You can also control these from the appliance console today. So some of what drove this things that we talked about last sprint with enabling SAML, you have the option to disable the local login from requirements that you may have. So with that, if the IDP is down, So this is gonna gives you an easy way to re-enable the local login. So you can come from Appliance Console and So here you'll just on the right side you'll select what you need to do and then click Forward to apply the updates. Next slide, please. Okay. So similarly, you can enable these three options using the Appliance Console CLI access. Okay, that's it for that. Off to next slide, please. All right, on the API side, we've bumped up the versioning to 2.2.2.2.0 to coincide with the upcoming Darker release. One thing that was added was the exposing new collection API settings. What's available is a subset, obviously, of the whole configuration, but in this example, you can specify a section of interest here, API settings product, and this is actually used for some SSUI. Off to next slide. Okay, so yeah, we merged in a PR from Romain Bertrand, which is pretty cool. It allows CRUD on the tenant quotas. So here you'll see the quotas sub-collections of tenants, creating the quotas, and then the usual queries of all of them or a particular one, updating them. Again, either the edits, action on the post or the put, as well as deleting them. So that was a good enhancement there. And I think that's it for the API. Off to next slide, please.
Rich.
Okay. For SmartState, this sprint, we had essentially 13 PRs merged. There's the distribution. 9 of them were bugs across multiple providers, SCVMM, VMware, Azure, and some common bugs that we encountered. We also had 4 enhancement PRs. Next slide. Okay, as you may recall, last sprint, we did encounter a problem where we were seeing some distributions of Linux being installed with thin provision LVM volumes, which would cause SmartState to fail because we just didn't recognize them. At that point, we just added code gracefully, so if there weren't the root volume, we could still successfully scan the VM. In this sprint, we added full support for logical volume, thin provision volume, so we can actually read the data now. So when we encounter Linux distributions with thinly provisioned LVM root volumes, we'll now be able to fully support those in SmartState. We also added SmartState support for Azure. And this is full symmetric support both for images and instances. Currently, the scans I've been seeing take about 10 to 15 minutes, but it hasn't been optimized at all. There's no caching going on, so some of the optimization steps will be added going forward. I just want to point out that some of the preliminary pull requests to enable this were made in the last sprint, and this sprint essentially we just tied it all together and available. I want to point out that I could have done a demo here, but I chose not to. That's it.
Turn it over to Gregg McCullough.
All right, for Automate, no demos. We had 2 modeling changes. One is we moved the quota source type, which was previously down within a method, making it a little bit harder to find and change. That's been moved up into the instance, so a lot nicer to be able to access it there. And then for the VM reconfigure side of the house, we added auto approval and email, which were missing within that request type. So moving into VM provisioning, a feature request we've had for a while was to be able to disable the auto placement logic and supply the placement fields, which has never been supported through either create provision request or REST API. So that's now enabled. If you use it, the caller is responsible for providing all of the placement fields that are marked as required within the dialogues. And the default is still set to placement auto, so it doesn't enforce it, or it doesn't change the default behavior today. If you jump to the next slide, a real quick example of, so this is an Amazon provision request where I've specified false for the placement auto, and then I think I'm supplying pretty much everything here, but all the different fields that are required as part of that provision request, I'm passing along the IDs of the instances within the database to support that. Yeah, so that's a feature that's been asked for a while. Glad to finally get that one in. Next slide. So these are two features that came in this sprint, but still not fully usable as is in the product, but a lot of modeling came in. So for the generic object, there's two new models, the definition for the generic object and the generic object itself. So what we're doing here is allowing a user to basically create the class with the definition, defining all the properties that they want to expose and the types, very similar to a normal active record object. And the idea is that they'll be able to interact with that, but they're object types that we don't have to define and create within our application. So the common use case we've talked about is something like creating load balancers within the system, and being able to ultimately expose relationships within those objects, but do it completely from this generic class. Right now, for the generic object, there's a few common attributes that we decided on with name, UUID, and of course the definition class that it derives from, that it derives its attributes, additional attributes from. So those models are in there, but again, they're not really usable right now the way they sit, but we're going to work on being able to define those object types and then ultimately exposing this to automate and the REST API to allow people to create and define these objects and wire them up. And then Madhu, you want to talk about Git?
So in this sprint, we actually made some modeling changes to help us support space repository.
I'm hearing Madhu.
That's okay. All right. So in this sprint, we actually made some modeling changes to support Git information, which will help us down the road where we have to access, put them into the database. And there is a new role now called the Git repositories owner that you would see. It only allows you to set it, but there is no real candidate at this point. We are waiting for some of the PRs to get merged. You would also support, imports based on branches and tags. And there's going to be a rake task and a UI that will allow you to do the import in the future.
Are either of these features slated for Dargo or for the e-release? As user.
Dargo, yeah.
Okay, cool.
Next slide, please.
Marianne, next slide. Thank you.
Hi. Yeah, it's me. Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, sure. Okay. In this sprint, we did most of the work. We're almost done, all but minor changes. So what is Dockerizing ManageIQ effort is about? So besides being fashionable and every application is actually being almost every application is being delivered by container, it's also a good method of bringing up fast and easy appliances. So it's about time that ManageIQ will get into that time where it's very easy to deliver through a container image, very easy to deploy, a single line of deployment. So the general intent is for every release upstream, to release a Docker appliance that with a single line, any user can run very, very fast. Now, this is not only targeted for the users community, so what can developers do about that? So personally, I'm doing a lot of things with it. For example, unmerged topic branch, big chunks of integration points, which are usually painful. So delivering the entire topic branch to someone to test it, to go over it, even before, way before merging it. So this is very easy to be done with this aspect, with this feature. And we actually, in the container management group, we used it for several features. Now, for me personally, running multiple environments on the same host, everything with multiple versions all around without having to manage it every time with multiple scripts. It's very, very easy to be done. Test with appliance mode and in clean environment. So I urge you, everyone, to start testing it and using it to see how it's comfortable. It also will make you more familiar with Docker, which is cool, very cool and very easy to use. So how should developer use it? It's in, there is a README file under the Docker access directory in ManageIQ Git repo. So just simply follow the instructions there. So you can either download it from GitHub, which there's an instruction how to do it. This is mainly for users. For developers, there's an instructions how to build it and run it. Now, I must admit that there are some small updates to be done to that README file, which will happen in the very, very, very soon. But anyway, also the instructions there work, even they are not the latest update. So what should you be aware of or know about this, this containerized ManageIQ? So it's, first of all, it's a monolithic. It's a first phase on the way because it's a monolithic, a single container, although the DB data resides on an external volume, it's still a monolithic appliance. It's based on systemd and CentOS 7, but as I said, this is the first phase. The second and the third phase that we will probably discuss towards 5, 7, and later will be about structure or structure separation database from the appliance itself. It's works currently. The patch was merged last night, so it actually utilized the appliance mode like in the regular appliance. It doesn't need to make any difference for developers. It's even cleaner to run the appliance mode on in a developer environment. Simply check it out. The size, which is the downside for a big monolithic image, is about 1.3 gig. On the first execution of the container, only this is the point in time where the DB is actually being populated with data. So all the DB migrations are running. So the first execution takes a bit longer. It depends on your, well, the performance entirely when running a container. It depends on your hardware. So it may take a longer time with slower hardware. But for me, on my ThinkPad with SSD, it takes the entire process takes about between 15 minutes from scratch. But Docker build parts is being done very, very efficiently. So if you only change code and you want to upload it again, it only runs the all the Ruby stuff, all the ManageIQ part at the end. So all the rest of the stuff of building the container image is being saved. So every time it is very fast to rebuild and bring it up. So I urge you all the developers and users to play around with it and give me feedback. I'm here, so give me feedback and ask requests and whatsoever. This is for you. Thank you.
Thanks, Barak, and over to Dennis for performance.
Okay, so we had 22 pull requests this sprint. As you can see, the bulk of them were under the enhancement area. I'll say that the effort wasn't that lopsided. The amount of time spent on bugs versus enhancement was probably more even than that. Next slide, please. I'll call a couple areas out in particular. We now supporting vertical columns in the database. Was done in Ruby before. It's important for a few reasons. Dramatically reducing the number of database queries, the amount of data being moved out from the database into Ruby objects. That memory was being obviously taken from other processes on the appliance. That really hurt. Some early testing, prototype testing with customer data. We had some screens. The sort would take over 9 minutes. It was down to a few seconds. In some cases, you have customer data where they weren't able to render the screen at all. They would just time out. So that's a good sign. There's still ongoing work with the Rails team. This is tightly coupled to the Rails implementation. So there's still some ongoing work there that'll have to continue. Metrics rollups was a small change with a massive performance impact. Again, it's about number of queries and the amount of data being moved. In one customer case, it was they couldn't do the rollups, wouldn't complete. Now they can do the rollups. So kind of dramatic. RBAC, I called out here because an ongoing effort is really reducing the amount of SQL load on the appliance. This is the focus across all aspects of the appliance, of the application. Right now, we're really focused in the RBAC area, and we'll take it to other parts later on. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Dennis. Thanks, everyone. I mean, the demos here are quite breathtaking, I would say. Just so many major improvements in so many areas. It's really want to thank everyone involved, all the whole expanded team. It's really a major team effort. And from my personal perspective, it's really good to see all the various teams work together cohesively to kind of deliver all this functionality and demonstrate it. It's really fantastic. So thank you to everyone. Any questions or comments on the phone or anywhere? Okay. Well, thank you very much. Wonderful work across the board, and we'll have the next sprint review in 3 weeks, and watch out for the Darga release. We'll make the Darga build over the next few days. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye.